Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why some things you do just feel automatic, like you can't even stop them if you wanted to? Well, this new study dives deep into how we form those habits, and if our lab tests are actually measuring them, right? So imagine your brain has two main ways of doing things. One is like a super smart planner that carefully thinks about every step and what outcome it will bring. This is your goal-directed system. The other system is like a well-worn path, a shortcut, that just does things automatically when a certain cue shows up. That is your habit system. Researchers have been trying to figure out how this automatic habit system works, especially how it gets built up with repetition. Think about learning to drive. At first, you are super focused. You think about every single step. Okay, clutch in, shift to first, gently release the clutch while pressing the gas. That is goal-directed. But after years of driving, you just put the car in drive and go, sometimes without even thinking about it. That is habits. Scientists call habits context. Triggered outcome-insensitive responses. That just means when you see a familiar situation or cue, you do the action connected to it, and you do it without really caring anymore about the specific reward you used to get from it. The big question in this research is whether the experiments scientists use in the lab can really capture this automatic habit-like behavior. They've tried a bunch of different tests, often based on how they study habits in animals. The classic way to test for a habit is pretty clever. They train an animal or a person to do something to get a reward. Then, they make that reward less appealing. If the person or animal still keeps doing the action even though the reward is now bad, that is supposed to be a sign of a habit. The action is on autopilot and not really paying attention to the outcome anymore. They also mess with the contingency, meaning how reliably the action gets the reward. If the action starts producing the reward less often, a goal-directed system would stop, but a habit system might keep going. One of the first big experiments was the Free-Operant Task. People learned to press keys to get snacks. Then, they were made to feel really full of one of the snacks, so it wouldn't seem appealing anymore. The idea was that people who had done this a lot would keep pressing for the now, yucky snack, showing habit. But guess what? This didn't really work out as planned in many follow-up studies. People often did stop going for the yucky snack, even after lots of training. This made researchers wonder if their lab tests were actually measuring habits or something else. Another approach is the slips of action task. Here, people learn to associate certain pictures with actions that earn points. Then, the rules change. If they make a mistake by performing the old action instead of the new correct one, that is a slip of action, and that is supposed to be a habit. But again, many studies failed to show that more training led to more of these slips. It seemed like the goal-directed system was just too strong, or maybe people weren't really learning the outcomes properly. Then there was the aliens task. People were traders earning points by exchanging cookies for diamonds. Some cookies gave high-value diamonds, and some gave low-value ones. After training, one of the diamond types was devalued, meaning it wouldn't give points anymore. The task was to notice this and switch to the other cookie type. While people did switch, the researchers found that the speed of their responses didn't show the expected habit pattern. It was like they weren't automatically doing the old thing. They also tried contingency degradation, which basically means making the link between an action and its reward less predictable. The idea is that if you are just doing something out of habit, you'll keep doing it even if the reward becomes unreliable. But again, in many studies with humans, people were quite good at adjusting, even with lots of training. So the bottom line for these classic methods is they haven't consistently shown that simply doing something more often in a lab makes it become an automatic habit that ignores rewards. This is a big problem because it suggests either the theory is a bit off for humans, or more likely their lab tests aren't quite hitting the mark. The researchers here point out that maybe when we're in the lab, we're just too focused and our goal-directed system is always too strong to let those pure habits shine through. Because the old ways weren't working so well, researchers started trying new things. One promising area is called novel approaches. One really interesting one is the forced response task. Instead of letting people decide when to respond in this task, they're told to respond at a very specific moment, like at the end of a sound sequence. But here is the twist. The cue that tells them which answer to give appears at different times during that sequence. So sometimes they have lots of time to think. And sometimes they have barely any time. They learn pairs of responses, like, if you see this picture, press this button. After a lot of practice, during the test, when they had very little time to respond, they were more likely to make the old mistake, the one they learned before, even if they were supposed to be doing something new. This was a sign that the old habit was popping up when they didn't have time to think. In one study, researchers had people learn a specific action for a specific picture. Then they reversed it, made it so a different action was now correct for that picture. Even after lots of training on the original action, when people were rushed, rushed, they were more likely to perform the old now wrong action. This did show a training effect. The more they practiced the old way, the more likely they were to stick with it when rushed. This task also had a good feature. It had 4 possible answers, not just 2, which helped them tell apart a true habit error from just a random guess. Another similar approach is a reversal choice task. Here, people learn a certain color means pressing the left door is good, and another color means pressing the right door is good. Then, they switch it, same color, but now the opposite door is good. When people were rushed, they were more likely to stick with the old pattern, even though the rules changed. This suggests that their learned association with the color was hard to update quickly. They also looked at discriminated heterogeneous chains. Imagine a Rube Goldberg machine of actions. You do action 1, which leads to seeing a new cue, which lets you do action 2, which gets you a reward. The idea is that if you practice this a lot, stopping action 2 shouldn't affect action 1 anymore. But in humans, this didn't quite work out, even with lots of practice. Stopping the second action still seemed to affect the first. The action sequence task is a bit different. People learned the sequence of button presses. Then, on some trials, they were shown 2 options at once, and they had to pick the one that led to a better reward. After a lot of practice, they were more likely to mess up and pick the wrong, but sequenced option when they didn't have much time to think. The motor sequence learning task involved learning a long sequence of movements. Then, during testing, they'd sometimes skip a step in the sequence, and people who had practiced a lot were more likely to just keep doing the old sequence even when it didn't make sense. But here is a key point. In this case, the cue for the old sequence wasn't even shown. So it is not clear if it is a true stimulus-response habit or just remembering a motor pattern. Then there is frequency-based decision-making. Here, people just chose between 2 options that gave the same reward. The question was whether they'd more often pick the one they'd chosen more in the past, even if the reward was the same. They found people did tend to pick the more frequent option. But this is tricky because if the reward is the same, how can you tell if it is an outcome-insensitive habit or just a preference based on past choices? The researchers here note these tasks are different from the classic definition of habits because they don't have that clearly undesired option. So, what is the big takeaway from all this? The traditional ways of studying habits like outcome devaluation and contingency degradation haven't been super successful in humans. They often fail to show that more practice makes behavior more automatic and less sensitive to rewards. This is frustrating because it makes it hard to build reliable knowledge about habits. However, the newer methods, especially the force response task with its reversal manipulation, seem to be on the right track. These tasks show that when people are rushed, they're more likely to fall back on previously learned responses, meaning the habit system is still active and influencing behavior. The key seems to be creating situations where the goal directed system is a bit overloaded or doesn't have enough time to override the older learned response. This force response task has some really good features. It uses time pressure, which seems crucial for seeing habits. It also has multiple response options, which helps researchers tell apart a real habit error from a random mistake. And importantly, the measures they use in this task show good reliability, meaning if you repeat the test, you get similar results. That is super important for any scientific measurement. Another big point this paper makes is about reliability. Reliability in science means that if you measure something, you get consistent results. They looked at how reliable the different measures in these habit studies were. Sadly, in many cases, reliability wasn't reported, or it was quite low. This means we can't be very confident in the results from those studies. They found that only about half of the measures they looked at had acceptable reliability, and the force response task was among those that did. So, what does this mean for us? It means that studying habits in the lab is tricky. The old classic methods might not be the best tools for the job when it comes to humans. The newer methods, particularly those that use time pressure and reversals, are showing more promise. They suggest that habits are indeed learned through practice, but become most apparent when our more thoughtful brain systems are a bit taxed or can't intervene. This research is like a detective report on how we study habits. It is showing us that some of the detective tools haven't been working well, but they found some new, sharper tools. The key seems to be creating scenarios where our automatic responses can be seen. Rather than situations where we're always thinking hard, it also highlights that for any scientific measure to be trustworthy, it needs to be reliable and valid. This study is a big step in giving us better ways to understand those automatic behaviors that shape so much of our lives. What do you guys think? Do you find yourself acting out of habit more often than you realize? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, Give it a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more mind-bending science. We'll see you next time.